Hello and welcome to another edition of the Talking City podcast with myself, Alex James, joined today by Joe Bray to reflect on the final day of the Premier League season. A season that's felt quite long at times, I would imagine, this year, Joe.
Yeah, really long and really short at the same time, with a few less fixtures without sort of Champions League at the end of the season. But no, it was a bit of a last day of school feel to the trip to Fulham with the sun's out, there was a job to do, but City had basically done that job against Bournemouth, and yeah, it's always nice. City always go to Craven Cottage when the sun's out, and it's a lovely place to go, and a lovely walk to the ground. So it sort of felt like it was that kind of vibe, and Kevin De Bruyne leaving, and as soon as they sort of scored and were on the way, it was that sort of laid back feel, and there wasn't many sort of celebrations. So it felt like everyone was quite happy that the season was over, because it's been long in terms of not really wanting to be the season that they hoped for.
Yeah. Everybody playing Buckaroo were they around you in the press box and ball games,
signing everyone's shirts, and yeah.
As you said, there was a job to do. I mean, as it turned out, it didn't need doing because of the sort of failings of Newcastle and Aston Villa. But there was a job to do, and that was pretty much the one and only thing that City needed to take from Fulham, and it's the one thing they did take from Fulham to make sure they're in next season's Champions League, which I don't know, it felt at times like that was really in doubt, but in the last, I'm not sure what the unbeaten finish is it 10 games unbeaten at the end of the season, something like that, that it's not really felt like they were going to miss out in the last sort of 6 or 7 weeks, has it? It's always felt like they had enough, but till you get over that line, you're never quite sure.
Yeah, and the sort of the games where you thought they might slip up, so Aston Villa at home and maybe even Man United away, or like those sort of tricky games, City did what they needed to do. I know the derby was a draw, but they won the games they needed to and did the hard work before the final day. So it meant that they did have a bit of insurance if they didn't get the job done. But because Fulham didn't have anything to play for, it was relatively straightforward. They were celebrating their best ever sort of points total, and you do get these last day games where only one team is having something to play for, and it shows. So Fulham did have a go. They were sort of causing trouble after the first goal, but I think that first goal from Gundogan was brilliant. It was you saw Nunes go in, and you're thinking, oh, has he wasted the chance? You see Haaland screaming at him to cut it back, which looked like the right ball, and then suddenly Gundogan does that, and it's amazingly his first goal of the season. And he's told me afterwards he's never scored a goal like that in his career, and I'm not really surprised at that, because you don't expect someone like Gundogan to pull out a bicycle kick, but it sort of sets City on the way. Then they get the penalty, and even that, there was a bit of debate over who takes the penalty after the cup final, and Haaland just steps up and rolls it into the bottom corner, and it was as straightforward and simple as they would like. So I think, yeah, Villa and Newcastle did them a favour, but for City to finish third in this season, by the way, after everything that's gone on and all the games they've lost, it's a pretty decent achievement, I think, and maybe shows that no one else has really been able to challenge. But you look at the table as well, Liverpool fade away after deservedly winning the title, but 13 points between those two teams doesn't feel like it's such a massive distance as it might have been 2 or 3 months ago when Liverpool were 20 odd points ahead. In the plotting next season, I think City will be relatively confident with how they've ended this one.
Yeah, I agree with that. I think at one point it looked like a complete disaster, didn't it? But then you actually sort of look at the, even just the numbers. I think it's 3 points to Arsenal in the end. They scored more goals than Arsenal. They won more games than Arsenal. I know Arsenal drew loads, which hampered them significantly. Defensively, they've not conceded, even with all the trouble that they have had defensively in terms of player availability and just general ability at times. They haven't sort of shipped loads and loads of goals in compared to Liverpool or anyone else in the league, and they've done that with the best player in the world playing 10 minutes in the last 10 months. So there are, if we're looking at a glass half, I think if City won a cup final, we'd all be sitting here now thinking, yeah, do you know what? In terms of a kind of a rebuild season that maybe we didn't know was going to be a rebuild season, we've won a trophy and we've come third and we're back in the Champions League and we can push on from there. And that cup final changes a lot. The fact that they've not won a trophy, it has to go down as a big failure. Finishing third has to go down as a failure, even kind of ridiculous as that sounds, the words coming out of my mouth. But there are, I said earlier, it's a 10-game unbeaten end to the league season. They started the season like a train as well. I mean, unbeaten until whatever it was, at end of October, I think, wasn't it? Until that League Cup game. It's just the middle. It's just that awful bleak winter period that if you took that out, and I realise that's ridiculous because if you took that out, obviously it would be different. But there are signs there that City have kind of adjusted and reset a little bit. You then freshen up with perhaps a new signing or two, and all hope is not lost.
Yeah, it's a couple of like random quotes from throughout the season pop up as you're saying that. I remember speaking to De Bruyne at West Ham, and he was playing brilliantly, and Haaland was scoring loads of goals, and City was starting really, really well and winning everything. And he said that they were surprised at how quickly and how well they'd started because of the Euros and having barely any players on tour and everyone coming in from basically a
wasn't it? In August with that youthful team in the tour and City having a few players in the Euro.
But they were sort of going one goal behind and then winning 3 or 4-1. And it was we were sort of saying, well, if they just cut out that first goal, then no one will be able to stop them. But actually, they went the other way and just started conceding a second goal instead, and injuries hitting and Rodri and everything mounted up. But you can sort of see maybe in hindsight, De Bruyne had a point where maybe those issues might have been there earlier on, and they were just papering over those issues, and then they just became too much. And I think Rodri was sort of he is far more than sort of a plaster that comes off and the sort of floodgates open. But I think his injury, everything always will stem back to Rodri's injury, because your fullbacks play better when Rodri's there, your centre-backs play better, your defensive midfielders, every single player is more assured in their position and the system works better when Rodri's there. So then you take out your central defenders when all of them get injured and you've got to play Jemai Simpson-Pusey for 5 or 6 games in really big Champions League games, and everything rolls back into that thing. But I think you normally expect City to win a lot of games and put a run together in sort of November, December, January, and actually they went the other way and lost half of the games that they played, and from that point that was it. But if you're going to have a season where everything goes wrong, you probably want it to just be one season where all your injuries happen, your sort of the worst possible player is out for the whole campaign, you lose a cup final, you're so far away from the Premier League, and you have a nightmare in the Champions League. You probably want it all in one. It probably resets and refocuses minds at City, and maybe they can go forward and sort of learn from it. If maybe just one of those components had happened and they'd won a cup or they'd got further in the Champions League, maybe they would have carried on thinking that it was all okay. Maybe this is what they needed. Because I mean, Guardiola said at the start of the season, he thought that a smaller squad and not many additions was the way forward, and halfway through he was like, no, we sort of now know that we need a bigger squad. Of course, he's now U-turned on that, but it does seem like it's a season that has focused minds and will probably be a turning point for the next era, rather than just continue this one.
Yeah, and when you were saying then about they won a few games at this, they won several games at the start of the season, but they were going 1-0 down. I was just thinking, yeah, actually, I don't know, in these last 10 games, I mean, they were really good for 45 minutes against Palace, but they were 2-0 down. They kind of laboured through Everton away, last-minute goal against Villa, obviously didn't beat Southampton, 1-0 against Wolves. There probably hasn't been too many games there where you look back and think, oh, your City were motoring there.
Yeah.
But like everything, the result changes the perception, doesn't it?
But even in those brilliant runs that we see over the winter, or the sort of when they storm 10 wins in a row to win the title, they're not necessarily playing brilliantly for 90 minutes. They just do that. So they score those late goals and they get the comebacks and ride the luck a little bit, but they have that momentum. I think they found it in a sort of a weird sort of way, and they relied on the older players who'd done it before, and it might not have been the best football, but they did what they need to do. So I think it's an achievement to get Champions League in the way they did, considering where they were a few months ago. Yeah, like you say, at the start of the season, they would not consider this a success at all. And I think maybe even losing the cup final has helped that, because they can categorically say it's not been a successful season, rather than trying to fall back on that and make excuses or say, look at this, look how great this cup win was. But yeah, I think it will be a season that focuses a lot of minds at City, and we'll see how that translates into transfers. But it seems like there will be players leaving and some maybe emotion-free decisions made in terms of like Kevin De Bruyne leaving and maybe other players like that, where in the past they might have kept them on because they wanted to, whereas now it's, do we need to, and separating the sort of sentiment, heart over head and that sort of thing.
Yeah, and I think the kind of thing that Simon Bajkowski, our chief City writer, has done is sort of season ratings, which have gone on the MEM website this morning. And when you were looking through those, something that kind of strikes you as, it's not been, is where you previously might think, we got 4, 5, 6 people we could choose from here to be named player of the season. You're looking through this and you're struggling to create much of a, you're not creating a long list, and you're struggling to create much of a short list as well, aren't you? You're kind of looking at Gvardiol and thinking, can anyone take that off him? And even he's not been perfect, has he, this season?
No, and his sort of end to the season was a bit slower because he was, I say slower, it's just maybe less in the limelight because he was at centre-back, but no one's been more consistent than Gvardiol. He's not been perfect, like you say, but he's been there and he's been mostly good. And I think he will benefit from this season. I think he'll need a bit of support in terms of cover and rotation next season. But no, I think it's got to be between him and Haaland for me, and because Haaland scored 31 goals, and that's a bad season for him. If you say a bad season is 31 goals, then you've got a very, very good player on your hands. But I mean, I think last time I was on the podcast we spoke, and De Bruyne was the third name on City's Player of the Year shortlist, and
yeah, he's on the official club one, isn't he? But that feels like sentimentality more than.
He's not been the third best player for City. I think that's fair to say. So, on the other hand, who has, and no one, like you say, springs to mind, it would probably be someone who has been there. I might argue Bernardo. I like Bernardo. I think he's always got the effort, but I know he's been very unpopular this season in terms of the fan base. I think he's recovered towards the end, but it's sort of more who's put the effort in rather than who's been very good in terms of the performances. But yeah, I think Sai's got most of his ratings sort of spot on. He's sort of justified all of them. I might have put Akanji a bit higher, but it's also fair to say he's not had the same season as his own standards. I'm sure some fans will question that Matheus Nunes has got a 7, but we were talking about this, myself and Sai, on the way home from Fulham, and it's so hard to put Nunes in a position in terms of how good his season's been, because it's been full of errors and costly errors and errors that have cost important games. But he's also been playing out of position and he's ended the season well, and you can't fault his effort at all. But then you've got Guardiola saying he can't play in the middle, whether that's central defence. I don't know why he'd play there, but in his natural position of central midfield, you can't see that if City are going to press on, he's going to be the starting right back. So it's an odd one to judge, but I think when Guardiola says he's looking at the players who've been there and always turned up and always been available, you've got to sort of reward that a little bit in the context of the season. But no, there's probably more a range of scores than previous seasons. You know, there's a 3, 4, 5, and then you've got, I think 8 is the highest that Sai's given out. There's a lot more range in how the squad have performed, and that probably sums up why they've not been as good as they have been.
Yeah, I think Nunes was the when I was discussing it with him yesterday. Nunes was the one that jumped out to me, just because I find it difficult to put someone who is kind of joint third in these ratings as someone who's committed as many errors leading to goals as Nunes has. That doesn't sit right with me. But then they weren't my player ratings, and so I watches.
But I suppose the other question is where, and it sounds an odd thing to say, but where would they be without Núñez? Because he has played quite well at right back in this running of wins, and he's. If you'd said at the start of the season, Núñez will be your first choice right back, as Guardiola said himself, you'd sort of be laughed out of the room. But when Walker jumped ship and Lewis has been up and down in form, and Akanji hasn't been reliable, or the defensive options have required that he's in the middle, Núñez sort of has been there. So yeah, I think 7 might be generous, but it's not outrageous. I think it's a 6 or 7 is probably about fair, and takes into account that he's played out of position and he has sort of put the effort in, even if his maybe ability has sort of limited the performances, if I can be political with saying that.
Well, I mean, he's probably a microcosm of the campaign as well, isn't he? And like, yeah, they can't fault the effort, but we shouldn't ever need to fault the effort of Premier League footballers either.
Absolutely, yeah.
He's been available. Yeah, okay, we can say that is a positive this season, but more often than not, players should be available, and perhaps his mistakes or the low points have masked some of the consistent above averageness, if that's a word. That probably feels about right, and you could say that about a lot of the City squad. And when I was reading, like Nico O'Reilly was the other player along with Gvardiol to get an 8 out of 10 from Sai, and he's only played half the season, hasn't he? So yeah, his rating I think is probably fair because he's had a huge impact, particularly in the FA Cup run up until the final. But at no stage in August would anybody be thinking Nico O'Reilly will be the breakthrough star at left back like that. So that they all kind of tie into the same theme of masking the issues. We're talking about a right back and a left back who perform very well, and in no one's minds are really a right back and a left back.
No, and no one really wants them to be the fullbacks next season either.
Yeah, exactly. And that's nothing against either player because both of them have performed very well out of position. And that kind of sums up the issues that need to be addressed going forward, because massive decisions over quite a few players, I would say. Grealish obviously being at the forefront, even if it looks like that decision might have already been sort of taken just by how little he's been involved, and obviously not been involved at all on Sunday. And then this kind of contradiction of, well, we can't afford to carry this squad if we get a few injuries but I don't like leaving all the good players out when everybody's fit. So how are City going to go about that in terms of, how do you see it? Do you see kind of 3 or 4 new players and therefore maybe 3 or 4 leaving and the squad size being roughly what it is? Or do you think it'll be
I mean, it's got to go down, hasn't it? It can't stay as it is. And I mean, Guardiola's been saying for some time he doesn't like leaving the players out, and then with everyone coming back, bar Stones, you can tell it is bothering him, and I think he's trying to be fair. So it was Savinho who was out against Bournemouth, and Grealish might simply be a rotation option, but it's the context of his season, and it sort of goes back to the ratings. Like Núñez and O'Reilly get good marks because individually they've done well, but their performances haven't been on the same level as Gvardiol, for example, who gets basically the same mark. And Grealish and someone like Walker, you would expect better because of their experience, but also their sort of status in the squad. But they just haven't been reliable or their marks reflect sort of their context as well. So
yeah, that's true actually, because Grealish, it's not like Grealish has produced absolute rubbish every time he's been on the pitch. He just hasn't been on the pitch.
Yeah, but he's a player who, as Pep says, needs to play regularly, but he hasn't done better than Savinho or Doku to force his way in, and he's done all right when he's come in sort of in the FA Cup, but most of City's done in the FA Cup was against lower league opposition, so you would hope that a player worth £100 million would do well against a League One side, for example. And it's harsh, but sometimes it's just you got to play who's in front of you, but you would be surprised if he doesn't do that because of the sort of his clear ability. So yeah, it would be hard to see how his situation improves next season, because you would expect there to be even more competition sort of in the attacking midfield and wing areas. You would expect Foden to be better next season, and Doku and Savino should be able to push on, and Marmoush might be pushing for those areas. All of those are better options than Grealish at the moment. But then who's going to sign a 29-year-old player who's not played for the best part of 2 seasons regularly and not really performed, doesn't really know if he wants to be a sort of swashbuckling attacking midfielder or a cautious winger? City won't get anywhere near 100 million for him, but he's not going to go on the cheap either. So it'll be interesting to see where he could end up, if he does at all. So I think that's why Guardiola was saying he needs to play regularly, whether that's at City or elsewhere. But if he stays, then we'll welcome him. But it's going to be an odd one. There's some players where you think, well, the next move might be a loan, or you can see where it might go. Like, for example, Núñez is linked with Nottingham Forest. That could be a really good move for him. If there's anything in that, he would be playing regularly with a manager he likes and probably more likely in his attacking position. But you can't. There's some other players where you're not really sure where they might end up, or if there's much of a market for them. So I think it's going to be an interesting summer in that regard. But loans will take up some of these sort of spots in the squad. You can see players like maybe Echeverri or Reish or someone like that maybe going somewhere on loan just to spread out the squad. Then there's somewhere, I'm not sure. I think City will have quite a hard time in finding a buyer or a loan club, and that's before you remember players like Calvin Phillips who've got to come back and have long-term contracts. And I think it will be a very busy first summer for Hugo Viana, not just for incomings but for outgoings as well.
Yeah, but having said all that, I think we'll get deeper into some transfer chat on the podcast later in the week. But you sort of said that right at the start of that, the squad's got to be trimmed a little bit, and then proceeded to offer me no clue as to how we go doing that. So it doesn't.
Yeah.
And there's got to be. I would be amazed if City don't sign 3 players.
Yeah,
a fullback, a De Bruyne replacement, however you want to categorize that, and at least one more. So therefore, you're looking at, I don't know, maybe 3, 4, 5, 6 players been moved on at a minimum. And while loans might take a couple in, there's going to be some big conversations there around some big players like whether Bernardo Silva, and I know he's been linked with a move away every summer since the summer after he signed, but whether he stays long term, whether Edison stays long term, whether John Stones, Nathan Ake, there's quite a few players in that bracket. Grealish is in there as well, who have got, I guess, uncertain futures, even though they're really senior players.
Yeah, I think they're in the category of, if you're going to move some senior players on, you've got to consider them and say thank you for your efforts. But if we need a smaller squad and sort of need to trim things down and refresh, then you need players who you can rely on. And a lot of those players either haven't been reliable for performances or for fitness. So that's where those tough decisions need to be made. Gundogan's probably another one who fits in that. Like I say, we spoke to him at Fulham and he said no one told him any different. He's got his year extension and he expects to be there next season. But is he someone who you say thanks for a really strong end to the season? You got us into the Champions League, but we need something else in midfield. Can you keep Rodri, Kovacic, Bernardo and Gundogan in the same midfield when you also want to add another player to sort of replace De Bruyne, knowing that you've got Gonzalez as well? You probably want to. The numbers don't add up in terms of the squad that Guardiola wants and the squad that they've got. So some players who have been there and done really, really good things for City will have to probably be under that conversation. That's
why we're sat here pontificating about it, and Hugo Viana has got his salary and Pep Guardiola has got his salary to go and actually sort that out, Joe. So rather them than me, I think.
I could see Viana and Bagiristan were walking down the steps at Craven Cottage, and they've been sort of not hand in hand, but they've been very, very close since Viana started. And I think Bagiristan's until the end of the Club World Cup, I think. So that will help in that sort of transition. But at some point this summer, it will be sort of Viana's call, and it seems like he's thinking about what he wants to do, and he might have to sort of start by making some quite eye-catching decisions.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, time will tell, and time is up for this episode of the Talking. Look at that perfect segue there, Jay. Off the cuff as well. Time is up for the this edition of the Talking City podcast. So thanks for watching, thanks for listening, and we will see you again later in the week when, as I say, we'll get sort of into the meat of the transfer window a bit more, with that opening on Sunday, or at least the first half of the first portion of the double transfer window opening on Sunday. And obviously you can keep up to speed with all things City across our channels on social media and online. Thanks very much, and we'll see you soon.